My name is Melanie Boone. I'm 44, and the day I buried my husband, my sister told everyone I was too selfish to have children because I chose planes over family. She said it at the funeral reception, surrounded by our relatives, while I was still wearing my dress blues. Said it loud enough for my mother-in-law to hear, loud enough for the neighbors to nod in agreement, loud enough to make sure everyone knew that my childlessness was a choice, a selfish, career-driven choice that proved I never really loved the man we just laid to rest. What Rebecca didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been trying to have children for 8 years. What they didn't know was that I'd endured 6 miscarriages, 3 rounds of IVF, and countless nights lying awake wondering if God was punishing me for something. What they didn't know was that every time someone asked when Rick and I were going to start a family, it felt like a knife twisting in a wound that never quite healed. But Rebecca had always been good at finding the exact words to cut deepest. Growing up, she was the golden child. The one who got married young, had 3 beautiful babies before she turned 30, stayed home to raise them while her husband worked. She was everything my traditional Southern family valued: domestic, maternal, devoted to hearth and home. I was the one who wanted to fly. "It's not natural," my mother used to say when I talked about joining the Air Force. "Women aren't meant to be in combat. You should be thinking about finding a good husband, not playing soldier." But I didn't want to play anything. I wanted to soar above the clouds in an F-16, wanted to feel the raw power of afterburners kicking in, wanted to defend my country from 30,000 feet. I wanted something bigger than the small-town life that satisfied everyone else in my family. So at 18, while Rebecca was planning her wedding, I was reporting to the Air Force Academy. While she was having her first baby, I was earning my wings. While she was hosting playdates and PTA meetings, I was flying combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan. And my family never let me forget that I'd chosen wrong. Every holiday gathering became an interrogation. When was I going to settle down? When was I going to give mom grandchildren? When was I going to stop this phase and become a real woman? Rebecca led the charge every time. "Mel's too busy playing war games to think about what really matters," she'd say with that sweet smile that made her criticism sound like concern. "Some women just aren't built for motherhood, I guess." The comments got worse after I married Rick. He was a fellow pilot, a man who understood my passion and supported my career. But suddenly I was selfish for keeping him from having a family, and emasculating him by outranking him when I made lieutenant colonel before he did. When Rick deployed to Syria 3 years ago, Rebecca made sure everyone knew I should have deployed instead. "A wife's place is with her husband," she announced at Sunday dinner, "but I guess Mel's career comes first, as usual." She didn't know that I'd volunteered to take his deployment. She didn't know that Rick insisted on going because he wanted me to have the stability I needed for our fertility treatments. She didn't know that we'd made the decision together, as partners, because we were still hoping, still trying, still believing that maybe this time would be different. Rick died when his F-22 went down during a training exercise. Mechanical failure, the investigation concluded. No enemy fire, no pilot error. Just one of those tragedies that remind you how dangerous our profession really is, even during peacetime. I was in the middle of a mission planning session at Nellis Air Force Base when Colonel Martinez called me into his office. I knew from his face before he said a word. "Mel, I need you to sit down." The funeral was everything Rick would have hated. Too much ceremony, too many people who barely knew him talking about his sacrifice. But his family needed it. And my family needed to be seen supporting me through my tragedy, so I endured it all in silence. Rebecca flew in from Charlotte with her husband and kids, playing the devoted sister who'd come to comfort me in my time of need. She hugged me in front of everyone, whispered condolences that sounded rehearsed, and made sure people saw her being supportive. But at the reception, when she thought I was safely distracted by accepting condolences, she started holding court near the dessert table. "It's just so sad," I heard her saying to my aunt and Rick's sister. I mean, they were married 8 years and never had children. Rick wanted kids so badly. He talked about it every time we saw him, but Mel was always too focused on her career to really commit to being a wife. I was standing about 10 feet away, accepting a casserole from a neighbor, but every word hit like a physical blow. She chose planes over family, Rebecca continued, her voice carrying that tone of sorrowful wisdom she used when dispensing judgment. Some women just aren't built for motherhood, and Rick suffered for it. Now she'll never have anything left of him. Rick's sister looked uncomfortable, but my aunt nodded knowingly. I always wondered about that. 8 years of marriage with no children? That's unusual unless there's a reason. Oh, there was a reason, Rebecca said with certainty. Mel's always been selfish. Even as children, she had to be the center of attention, had to be special. She couldn't just be content being a wife and mother like the rest of us. I felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart, that had been shattered 3 days ago. This was different. This was the final thread, connecting me to a family that had never understood me, never supported me, never bothered to ask about the struggles I was too proud to share. I walked over to their little group, still holding Mrs. Henderson's casserole. "Excuse me," I said quietly. They all turned, and I watched Rebecca's face flush as she realized I'd heard her performance. "Mel, honey, You were just explaining to everyone why Rick and I never had children." "I didn't mean..." "You meant exactly what you said." I set the casserole down on the nearby table and looked directly at my sister. "You said I chose planes over family. You said I wasn't built for motherhood. You said Rick suffered because of my selfishness." The small group was deadly quiet now. Other conversations were starting to pause as people sensed the tension. That's exactly what you said. And you said it at my husband's funeral, while I was still burying the man I loved more than my own life." Rebecca glanced around nervously, aware that we were drawing attention. "Mel, you're upset? You're not thinking clearly?" "I'm thinking perfectly clearly, for the first time in years, actually." I looked around the room, at the faces of family members who'd spent decades making me feel like a failure for not conforming to their expectations, at Rick's relatives who were seeing our private business aired in public, at the neighbors and friends who'd come to pay their respects and were getting a show instead. "You want to know why Rick and I never had children?" I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "We tried for 8 years, 6 miscarriages, 3 rounds of IVF. Thousands of dollars in fertility treatments, hundreds of shots I gave myself, hoping this time would be different." Rebecca's face went white. "Rick held me while I sobbed after every pregnancy loss. He drove me to every doctor's appointment, every procedure, every heartbreaking follow-up where we got more bad news. He never once made me feel like it was my fault. Never once suggested I should quit flying to focus on getting pregnant. Never once made me choose between my career and our family." The room was completely silent now. "But my own sister," I looked directly at Rebecca, "my own family spent years making me feel like a selfish failure for not giving you the grandchildren and nieces and nephews you wanted. Never bothering to ask if maybe, just maybe, there was more to the story." Rebecca was crying now, but I wasn't finished. "Rick wanted children more than anything, but he wanted me happy more than he wanted to be a father. When the doctors told us that my job's physical demands might be affecting my ability to carry to term, he begged me not to give up flying. He said he'd rather spend his life with me as a pilot than with any other woman as a mother." I could see the shock on faces throughout the room, people realizing they'd been judging a situation they never bothered to understand. "So yes, Rebecca, I chose planes over children. Because every pregnancy I lost, every failed treatment, every month of hoping and disappointment, Rick was there reminding me that I was enough just as I was, that our marriage was complete, even if our family wasn't." I walked closer to my sister, lowering my voice but keeping it audible to the people nearby. "But you were so concerned with what was natural and proper and traditional that you never once asked if I was okay. You never wondered if maybe your sister was struggling with something private and painful. You just assumed I was selfish and made sure everyone else assumed it too." Rebecca reached for my hand. "Mel, I'm so sorry, I didn't know." "No, you didn't know, and you didn't care to know." I stepped back from her outstretched hand. You cared more about judging me than supporting me." I looked around the room one more time, at my mother, who was staring at the floor in shame, at Rick's parents, who were looking at me with new understanding and compassion, at the extended family and friends who'd just learned that their assumptions about my marriage were completely wrong. Rick and I had 8 beautiful years together. We traveled the world, served our country, supported each other's dreams, and loved each other fiercely. We would have loved to have children, but we never needed them to be happy. I picked up my purse from a nearby chair. "I'm sorry you had to learn about our struggles this way, but I'm tired of being judged for a situation none of you bothered to understand. I'm tired of being made to feel like a failure for something that broke my heart every single day." I started toward the door, then stopped and turned back to Rebecca. "Next time you want to explain why someone doesn't have children, maybe ask them first. You might discover that not everything is about choices or selfishness. Sometimes it's just about life being cruel in ways you can't imagine." I walked out of that reception and didn't look back. But life wasn't finished with me yet. 2 months after Rick's funeral, I was back at Nellis, throwing myself into work because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. Flying was where Rick and I had met, where we'd fallen in love, where we'd built our life together. In the cockpit, I could still feel close to him. I was in the middle of a routine training flight when my radio crackled with an emergency call. "Maverick 1-1, this is Nellis Tower. We have a civilian aircraft down approximately 15 miles northeast of the base. Single-engine Cessna, pilot and 2 passengers, including 1 child. Search and rescue is en route, but ETA is 25 minutes due to weather conditions." I looked out at the storm clouds building on the horizon. 25 minutes might be too long. "Nellis Tower, Maverick 1-1 requesting permission to investigate." "Negative, Maverick 1-1. Weather is deteriorating rapidly. Return to base immediately." I could see the crash site in the distance, a small plume of smoke rising from what looked like rough terrain. The weather was bad and getting worse, but not impossible, not yet. "Nellis Tower, I have visual on the crash site, requesting permission to assess the situation. Maverick 1-1, you are ordered to return to base. This is not a combat situation, requiring immediate pilot response." I thought about Rick, about the oath we'd both taken to serve and protect. About the child somewhere in that wreckage, who might not have 25 minutes to wait for help. "Nellis Tower, Maverick 1-1 going off radio for equipment check." I switched off my radio and banked toward the crash site. What happened next changed everything. The Cessna had gone down in a narrow canyon, its wreckage scattered across rocks that would be impossible for ground vehicles to navigate quickly. But I could see movement near the main fuselage, someone waving a bright orange piece of fabric. I couldn't land in the canyon, but there was a service road about half a mile away. I set my F-16 down on that road. Not exactly regulation, but I'd done more dangerous things in combat zones. By the time I hiked to the crash site, I could hear a child crying. The pilot was unconscious, but breathing. A woman, the child's mother, was trapped under part of the wing, her leg clearly broken, but she was conscious and trying to comfort her daughter. "Are you okay?" she asked me as I approached, which struck me as exactly the kind of thing a mother would ask, more concerned about a stranger than her own injuries. "I'm fine. How's your daughter?" "Scared but not hurt, I think. I can't move my leg, and Tom," she gestured to the pilot, "he hit his head when we went down." The little girl was maybe 6 years old, tears streaming down her face but trying to be brave for her mother. "What's your name, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling down beside her. "Emma." "Hi, Emma. I'm Melanie, but you can call me Mel. I'm a pilot too. And I'm going to help get you and your mom out of here, okay?" She nodded, and something in her trust, her immediate faith that I would fix everything, reminded me why I'd chosen this profession in the first place. "I managed to free the mother, Lisa," she told me, "and stabilize the pilot enough to move him. But the storm was getting worse, and I knew search and rescue would be delayed even longer." My F-16 was a single-seat aircraft, obviously not designed for passenger rescue. But I had survival gear, emergency medical supplies, and most importantly, a radio to call for immediate helicopter evacuation to my position. It took 3 hours, but we got all 3 of them out alive. The pilot had a concussion but recovered fully. Lisa needed surgery on her leg but would walk again. Emma had nightmares for a while but was physically unharmed. And I got court-martialed. Leaving the training flight without authorization, landing on a public road, disobeying direct orders to return to base, technically, I'd violated about 6 different regulations. The Air Force doesn't take kindly to maverick pilots, even when their maverick behavior saves lives. The hearing was a formality. I knew it, my commanding officer knew it, everyone involved knew it. But rules were rules, and I'd broken them. I was prepared to accept the consequences. Probably a reprimand, maybe a suspension from flight status, possibly early retirement. I'd made my choice in that moment, and I'd make it again. What I wasn't prepared for was the media attention. Somehow the story leaked, probably from someone at the hospital where the family was treated. Female fighter pilot saves family, faces court-martial. Air Force punishes hero pilot for rescue mission. Lieutenant Colonel defies orders to save child's life. The story went viral. Suddenly, I was getting interview requests from CNN, Fox News, Good Morning America. The family I'd rescued was giving statements to local news stations. Aviation forums were debating whether I was a hero or a reckless pilot who endangered military assets. And my phone started ringing with familiar numbers. Rebecca first. Mel, I saw the news. I had no idea you were. What you did was incredible. I'm so proud. I hung up. My mother. Sweetheart, I've been watching the coverage, and I want you to know. I hung up. Even Michael, Rick's brother, called. Mel, Rick would be so proud of what you did. The family wants you to know. I hung up on him too. The court-martial proceeding was scheduled for a Thursday morning at Nellis. I drove to the base expecting a quiet hearing room with a few officers and a stenographer. Instead, I found a media circus. News vans lined the street outside the base. Reporters were interviewing anyone who'd talked to them about my case. Someone had organized a petition with over 50,000 signatures asking the Air Force to drop the charges. And standing near the main gate, holding a sign that read "Hero Pilots Save Lives," was Lisa, the woman I'd pulled from the wreckage with her daughter Emma. I tried to walk past them without stopping, but Emma broke away from her mother and ran to me. Miss Mel! Miss Mel! I knelt down to her level, aware that cameras were capturing every moment. Hi, Emma, how are you feeling? I'm good! Mommy's leg is getting better, and Tom is okay too! She threw her little arms around my neck. Thank you for saving us! Over her shoulder, I could see Lisa approaching with tears in her eyes. Colonel Boone, I can't thank you enough for what you did. When I saw you hiking toward that crash site. She shook her head. I knew we were going to be okay. Emma hasn't stopped talking about the pilot lady who came to help us. I'm just glad you're all safe. We wanted to be here today, to speak for you if they'll let us. What you did was heroic, and it's wrong that you're being punished for saving our lives. The hearing itself was a surreal experience. The charges were read, the facts were presented, witnesses testified about my, quote, reckless disregard for orders and military protocol. But outside the hearing room, crowds of supporters were gathering, not just civilians, but active-duty military personnel, veterans, other pilots who understood the split-second decision I'd made. The panel of officers deliberated for less than an hour. Lieutenant Colonel Boone, while this panel cannot condone the violation of direct orders and established protocol, we recognize that your actions resulted in the preservation of 3 human lives, including that of a child. The balance between military discipline and humanitarian instinct is one that every officer must navigate. I held my breath. You are hereby reprimanded for failure to follow direct orders. However, given the extraordinary circumstances and positive outcome of your actions, this panel recommends you for the Airman's Medal, for your heroic action in saving the lives of 3 civilians. The courtroom erupted in applause. Apparently more people had been allowed in than I'd realized. As I walked out of the hearing room, still processing what had just happened, I was surrounded by reporters shouting questions. Colonel Boone, how do you feel about receiving a medal instead of a court-martial? Do you have any regrets about your decision to land and attempt the rescue? What do you say to critics who claim you endangered military property? I stopped on the courthouse steps, looking out at the crowd of people who'd gathered to support a pilot they'd never met, who'd risked their own time to speak up for someone who'd done what she thought was right. I have no regrets, I said clearly. I took an oath to serve and protect, and that's what I did. The Air Force trained me to make split-second decisions under pressure, and I'll stand by the decision I made that day. What about your family? Are they proud of what you've accomplished? I paused, thinking about the phone calls I'd been ignoring, about Rebecca's sudden desire to claim credit for having a hero sister, about my mother's pride that only seemed to surface when it reflected well on her. My family is proud of me now, I said carefully, but the person who would have been proudest isn't here to see this. My husband, Major Rick Boone, was killed in a training accident 3 months ago. He spent his entire career serving this country and supporting my career, even when it was unpopular with people who thought I should be doing something else with my life. I could see the reporters scribbling notes, cameras capturing every word. Rick always said that the best thing about being married to another pilot was that we both understood the calling. We both knew that sometimes you have to risk everything to do what's right, even if other people don't understand your choices. I started to walk away, then turned back. I flew that day because it's what Rick would have done, because it's what we were trained to do. And because sometimes being a hero isn't about following orders, it's about following your conscience. The story of the court-martial and the medal dominated news cycles for weeks. I was invited to speak at military academies, aviation conferences, women's leadership events. People wanted to hear from the female fighter pilot who'd risked her career to save a family. But the invitation that surprised me most came from an unexpected source. Mel, it's Rebecca. I almost hung up, but something in her voice stopped me. I know you don't want to talk to me, and I understand why, but I'm calling because I need you to know how sorry I am. Not just about what I said at Rick's funeral, but about everything. About years of not understanding you, not supporting you, not being the sister you deserved. I stayed silent. I watched your interview last week, the one where you talked about Rick supporting your career even when it was unpopular, and I realized I was one of the people making it unpopular. I was so concerned with what I thought you should be doing that I never celebrated what you were actually accomplishing. Rebecca, no, please let me finish. I've been thinking about this for months, ever since the funeral, and I need to say it. Her voice was shaking. You're a better person than I am. You always were. You were braver, stronger, more willing to fight for what you believed in. And instead of being proud of that, I was jealous. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. I was jealous that you got to travel the world while I was changing diapers. Jealous that you had a marriage based on shared dreams and mutual respect while I married someone because it was expected. Jealous that you found something you were passionate about while I just did what I was supposed to do. She was crying now. And when you couldn't have children, I should have supported you. I should have asked how you were doing, offered to help, been there for you the way you were always there for me growing up. Instead, I used your pain to make myself feel better about my choices. I felt tears starting in my own eyes. The truth is, Mel, you're everything I was too scared to be, and I'm sorry it took seeing you on national television being called a hero for me to admit that. We were both quiet for a long moment. I don't need you to forgive me, she continued. I know I hurt you when you were already hurting, and that's unforgivable. But I needed you to know that I see you now. I see who you really are, and I'm proud to be your sister. Becca, I said softly, using the nickname I hadn't spoken in years, I missed you. I missed you too. I missed my sister, the pilot, the one who always dreamed bigger than our little town. I'm sorry it took me so long to realize that your dreams weren't a rejection of the rest of us. They were just yours. We talked for 2 hours that night, about Rick, about the miscarriages I'd never told her about her own struggles with marriage and motherhood that she'd never admitted to me, about how we'd both been performing versions of ourselves for so long that we'd forgotten how to be real with each other. It wasn't a magical instant healing. Trust has to be rebuilt slowly, carefully. But it was a beginning. 6 months later, Rebecca flew to Nevada for the ceremony where I received the Airman's Medal. She brought her kids, my nephew and nieces I barely knew, and they sat in the front row as the Air Force officially recognized my actions in saving the civilian aircraft crash victims. After the ceremony, as we were taking photos, my 10-year-old niece tugged on my dress uniform. "Aunt Mel, are you really a hero?" I knelt down to her level, thinking about that question, about heroism and sacrifice, about the choices we make and the prices we pay. "I'm a pilot who did her job," I told her. "But you know what makes someone really heroic? Being brave enough to be exactly who you are, even when other people don't understand." She nodded seriously, and I saw something familiar in her eyes, a spark of ambition, of dreams that might extend beyond what others expected of her. "Can girls really fly fighter jets?" she asked. "Girls can do anything," I told her. "The sky isn't the limit, it's just the beginning." Later that evening, Rebecca and I were sitting on my back porch, watching the sunset over the Nevada desert. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "The career? The choices you made?" I thought about Rick, about the life we'd built together, about the children we'd wanted but never had, about the family relationships I'd damaged by refusing to conform to expectations. "I regret that it cost me so much," I said finally. "I regret that Rick isn't here to see this recognition. I regret that we spent years not really knowing each other because you couldn't accept my choices, and I couldn't forgive your judgment." I paused, watching a hawk circling high above us. "But I don't regret becoming a pilot, I don't regret serving my country, and I don't regret landing on that road to save those people. Some things are worth the cost, even when the cost is everything." Rebecca nodded, and we sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. "My name is Melanie Boone, I'm 44, and I learned that sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving your family wrong, it's helping them understand that there was never anything wrong with you to begin with."